me see. I got a different hook in here. Good. All right. So we're going to talk now on soft swim baits, small grubs. All right. I see a lot of people, especially this time of the year, rig these things wrong. In my eyes, anyways. Yes, you can rig them wrong and still catch fish. All right. But so this bait doesn't have a hook on it. You see how soft and pliable that bait is? If you could fish that bait just like that without any hook in it, it would have so much action compared to a bait that is rigged. All right. Now, when I say rigging this wrong, this is a 3-inch grub. I'm gonna walk these hooks around right here, and this is semi-trick question, semi-not trick question. Take a good look at all those jig heads in my hand, and think about which jig head you would use to rig that 3-inch swim bait. All right. There's more than one right answer. There's only one wrong answer. All right. Who wants to volunteer an answer here?
The smallest one?
Yes. You are correct, but which out of the 3 would be the one you would select? They're the same order I showed you before.
I guess the left one?
The left one is a good selection, yes.
No, my left.
Your left.
Yeah.
Well, both end ones are right. All right. So, I'm going to explain this real quick. This is a Z-Med Ned rig jig head. This is a Keitech. I think that's an 1/8 ounce with a 1/0 hook. Both lengths of the shank are about the same length. The Keitech's a little longer than the Ned rig head is. The gaps are about the same. This is an owner jig head. You can see the owner versus the Keitech's even longer. All right. When it comes to finesse fishing, you don't want a real long shanked hook. Like this jig head would be way too big for a 3-inch swim bait. This jig head, that's a 3/4 ounce Kalin's jig head. I use this on swim baits. I'd put like a 6 or 7-inch swim bait on that. That's the size that would match with that. All right. I see guys put a head like this on a 4-inch swim bait. No good. No buku. Let's see. So let's say that's a 3-inch. Yeah, I don't have any bigger ones. All right. So.
I got
Yeah, if you got one, yeah, I'll take one. All right. So this is the smallest. This is the Ned rig head. Okay. Real short hook. Real short shank. Remember that bait with that without a hook in it. See how that's almost touching itself? You could just dangling by itself right there. Nice and pliable. Try and see what I'm doing here. As you get older, guys, your eyes get bad. That bait is still pretty pliable. See how that lost half its action though. All right. But because that hook shank is short enough, it's right there. It still gets plenty of action. All right. So this is a bigger Keitech swim bait, I believe. Yep. All right. That is a large bait. That is a large hook. I'm not going to rig it because I don't want to destroy it on you. But that bait would fit that hook perfectly. So I like to rig him hook length to bait length, like 1/4. So you've got 1/4 of that bait with a hook in it, and you got 3/4 of that bait roughly, or 2/3 of that bait roughly with no hook in it. Has plenty of action, plenty of motion to it, allows you to fish that bait and actually use the action that was engineered into that bait. If you overhook it, I'm calling it, you're going to lose half that action. It's not going to act the way you want it to. There. All right. And then the whole swim bait thing, that's a whole finesse technique in itself, and I'm going to explain that real quick. Because you could take this swim bait, and if you had to pick one bait to use in the springtime, you could use this. This bait could double as a crankbait, double as a finesse bait on the bottom, double as a Ned rig bait, most people call them these days. To me, it's just a open hook jig head. I've been fishing this for 25 years with an open exposed hook, you know, a small grub with no tail on it. The Ned rig is just a trade term, so to speak. Somebody got wise, oh, let's call it this, and you know, sells. Name sell. All right, so I'm fishing this swim bait, and let's say I lose the tail on it. Something bites the tail off. Now it's just that. Most of you would take that bait off the jig head, put another one on, and probably lose another tail. What I would do, fishing just like this for about 10, 12 casts. There's been a bunch of times in the springtime where I'm fishing small finesse grubs and I get the tail ripped off. And, okay, well, the tail's ripped off, I'll throw it back out there. This is a Ned rig. That's all that is. Your swim bait now turned into a Ned rig. It is a very versatile bait. So when you lose a tail on it, don't worry about it. If, let's say, it gets ripped up like this and it's starting to hang off the hook, now it has even more action. Use these things till they're literally ripped off your jig head. Especially with a tube jig. You get a tube jig and it's all ripped up to pieces and the head's barely staying in it. I've caught more fish on a beat up tube jig than a brand new one out of the pack. I like to call beat up jigs like that, I call them ugly jigs because they don't look visually appealing. Half the time I take a box in my boat, I'll use a jig, a bait, a swim bait, a tube jig, a grub, and take it off and I'll throw it in the bin. And they start to mix together with colors and they start to degrade and fall apart. I fish out of that bin all the time. Half the time I don't even go in my storage tackle. It's just, oh, what's in the bin? Oh, that'll work. Missing a tail, throw it out there. But it's stuff that is off the wall, stuff that the fish don't see all the time. That is some techniques that work really well. So swim bait, very, very good bait. Any questions yet? Concerns? Thoughts? All right.
Now you fish that over curly-tailed grub just with the subtleness of the paddle tail, or same time in the spring? I mean, maybe
I haven't
noticed
used
a difference in success rate, or have you
Yes.
fished both of those?
Yes. I haven't used curly tail grubs in a long time since I started picking up the swim baits. There's a time and place for a curly tail grub. To me, there's a time and place that the swim bait prevails over the curly tail grub. There's a time and place when the straight tail grub works better than all three of them. Again, you gotta let the fish tell you what they want. You can't expect to catch everything that swims on one bait, but you can try. I try all the time. If you had to pick a couple of baits to take with you in the springtime, soft body wise, I'd have a small finesse tube jig, a couple different packs of swim baits. Like these are the swing impacts. They're a little bit of the fatter style swim baits. They have a bigger, bulkier profile. They're going to fall a little slower, a little different. These are the swing impacts, thin ones, long and skinny. I'll pass this around, by the way, so you get an idea of the way it's rigged. These have a little bit more action, a little bit more pliable in the water. They're going to move different. It's very simple. It's all on the action of the bait. It's all on the movement of the bait. It's all on how you rig the bait. You know, I see a lot of people that I take on guide trips, a lot of the co-anglers I've had in tournaments over the years, rig things wrong, and they don't catch fish because of it. You know, I've offered my assistance, especially in tournaments, and some people tend to take offense to certain things because that's just the way they do things and don't want to listen to you. I will just offer this one word of advice. If you're in a boat with somebody, you're fishing a tournament, and you're getting waxed by the guy running the boat, and he offers you a bait, take his advice. All right? right? You both can fish the same exact thing. You don't have to fish different baits because he's using that and you're in the back of the boat. It's a farce. A lot of guys will tell you, well, I'm using something different because he's using something, different. They're biting one thing. You use the same thing. Okay? I have some friends that strictly only fish different things than me because I'm in the boat with them. They think it's going to give them the upper hand. It's like, they're biting this. This is all they want. Put it on. No. And by the time I catch 15 and 20 bass, then they decide to change, and it's too late because we're going home at that point in time. So, with that said, there's another option for you. These are shaky head style baits. There's a large variety of shaky heads on the market. There's a couple that I like. There's a couple that I don't use too many of. Let me see if I can get this open. Alright, so 2 brands that I like. And primarily because they have smaller hooks on them. There's a spot remover and a slider pro head. Those are the 2 that I like. Small size hooks, short shank, wide gap, and then this is
screw-ins or just
the spot remover is a screw-in, the one that I use, and the other is like a G-gap Texas style hook. This is I think this is a Strike King shaky head, a very large hook, but they advertise this as a finesse head. Technically, to me, it's not. This is something I would put in a 4-inch tube jig. That's not really finesse. That's kind of power finesse. That's it up here. So that is not what I would use on a regular basis.
That's a strike.
Yes. If I'm going to use that bigger shaky head, I'd be putting like a 7-inch Zoom trick worm or anything in the 7 to 8-inch range. That is like southern finesse, we'll call that. Okay? I guess that's the best way to put it. The other ones, I don't need it back there right now. The one with a round ball head on it and a little G-lock, that is a slider pro head. They have a nice heavy duty hook to them. They're sharp, and I will fish that one on a baitcaster because I think it's 3/16 3/4 ounce. The spot removers, an 1/8 ounce, has a screw lock on it. Screw locks aren't bad. They hold your baits. They tend to rip them up a little bit, but it is what it is. So if you want to catch fish, you got to do what you got to do. I would use those anywhere there's heavy wood that is more than just a log laying on the bottom. Some trees with branches, fishing docks. I would use a Texas rig or a shaky head, finesse head to keep the hook point from overexposing itself and getting yourself snagged on things. Any questions?
Do you ever use scented gels on any of your plastics?
Scented gels. Scents in general, I think, are a farce. All right, so I'm going to tell you something. Some people might disagree with me, but 70% of the stuff that's on the market for bass fishing is made to catch fishermen, not fish. Okay? So bass primarily feed in sight, sound, and vibration. They don't have nostrils like a trout. So trout and salmon, they find their way back to where they were born based off scent. Carp feed off scent. There's a bunch of other fish that feed off scent. Sturgeon, catfish, bullhead. They all feed off scent. Bass really don't feed off scent. Yes, the scent might help in certain situations, but in all the years I've tournament fished, all the tournaments I've ever won, I've never reached down and sprayed my jig with Bang. I've never reached down and put a smelly jelly on there. I've never had the urge to, I've never had the desire to, and it works for me. Now, I will say bass fishing is 25% technique, 25% being in the right spot, and then the other 50% being confident in what you're fishing. Bass fishing is really a mental game a lot of the times, especially in tournaments. If you're not confident in the bait that you have on the end of your line, you're probably not going to do very well with it. If putting smelly jelly on your bait adds that sense of confidence for you, put it on there. It's not going to hurt anything. It's not going to deter them from biting it. It's just you don't really need it. So that's my answer on the scents. Now there's other people that have different options and different variations of things. That's just how I feel. So
I think that's a good point when we talk about confidence. Because I'm not tend to fish, at least I know I'm not confident. I tend to fish faster than I should be.
correct.
In looking for that bite, looking for that fish, and even thinking as I'm fishing it, what lure I'm going to tie on next, and not focused on fishing that.
You don't want to do that
the way that it's meant to be.
Definitely.
That confidence factor is huge.
Definitely. And that's something that will help you later on in life, because your confidence and your ability to do this will translate into other things in your life. Especially, like, I'm public speaking in front of you guys right now. When I was in your shoes, doing this may not have been my comfort level by any means. Okay? But confident when I'm talking about, knowing what you're talking about is half the battle. The other half is getting up there. So, you got your hand up.
Going off of the whole scent thing.
Yeah.
And I've looked into power bait scent a lot, and they say that the whole taste thing, holding on to something longer. Do you think that has any more?
Yes, that is totally different than the scent. So they're not advertising their bait as the smell bringing them in, like an attractant. They just advertise it as a longer holding time frame. That does help a little bit, and that's kind of where the scent sort of plays, but it's not making them bite that bait any more or any less. All right. Now, with that being said, going back to the original comment I made, I fished the lightest jig heads I can get away with. The cold water, and I was talking about that topic earlier, and I got sidetracked mentally, and I threw it away mentally. When you're in that cold water time frame, those fish, they're not going to be very aggressive. They're not going to be very active. How many times have you hooked a bass and didn't even know you hooked it? If you're an avid fisherman, that's going to happen quite a bit. Okay? What that's doing is they're sucking that bait in from a couple feet, a couple 6 inches away, 7 inches away, and you're not really feeling that bite. You're not really feeling that reaction on the end of your line. I've had fish ice fishing. I have underwater cameras, through Aquaview and all that, and I'll be jigging a jig, and I'll watch a bass stop a foot away, flare its gills, and that jig will do this and swing right away from its face. It didn't suck it in on that first suck that it tried to inhale it, and that fish swam off. That's where the lightest bait possible comes into play. If they attempt to eat it when they're cold and lethargic, and they don't make it into their mouth, they're not going to eat it. They're not going to keep digging on it. They're not going to, run it down, because the more energy they use when it's cold out, the more they have to eat to sustain that energy. Cold-blooded animals again. So, temperature is a huge thing. All right, so you're going to fish all these baits in the cold water. That's great, dandy, all that. You're going to catch fish. Now that water's going to start warming up. You're going to be in that 50, 55 degree range. That is like the best time to go pre-spawn fishing. If you want to go out and teach yourself how to fish bait, that's the time to go. Because they're eating everything that you're throwing out there. They're feeding, they're getting fat, they're getting happy, and they're shallow. They're easy to find. You go find the warmest water in the lake, like I said, the north end, northeast, northwest side, anywhere there's not a lot of wind, there's going to be warmer water up there in the shallow water areas, that 3 to 8 foot range. Throw your jerk baits or throw your swim baits. You throw your finesse stuff, catch a bunch of fish, you get confident, fish are biting for you. If you want to teach yourself how to fish a jig and pig, you want to teach yourself how to fish a chatterbait, something different, that's a good time to do it, because that's when they're going to be a little bit more aggressive sometimes. They might knock the snot out of it, rip the rod out of your hand in that time frame, because there's so many of them. They're competing for food, getting ready to spawn. They're getting fat. They're getting ready to do their thing. So then you approach that spawning temperature, that 62, 63. You start seeing them make beds. At that point in time, the smallmouth in the lakes around here are usually locked on beds. Bed fishing, people have issues with that. I personally don't have any issues with it. You can catch a fish off a bed and he goes right back to it. I've sat on top of a bed and watched a fish for 10, 15 minutes. It was literally under the boat, 4 feet of water. They don't swim away. That is nature. That is their thing. They protect their nest that they have. And I read an article on bed fishing. It's a southern lake. They had a tournament. They tagged fish. They recorded where they caught the fish from, tagged them. Within a day and a half, they were back 18 miles down the lake on that same nest. So those are southern fish, southern bass, a little bit different DNA strain, but bass in general, they're ingrained to protect their young, they're ingrained to protect their nest, so they're going to do everything they can. So no issues with the bed fishing on my side of things. Bed fishing is usually more sight fishing when you can see and things like that. So that's that pretty much 63, 64 to about 72. Once you're in that low 70s range, you might have a wave of fish still spawning in a certain portion of the lake. You might have a wave of fish that are post-spawn in a certain portion of the lake. Usually, let's say Cayuga Lake, for example, end of May, beginning of June, usually opening week of bass season, Cayuga Lake is split right down the middle. Post-spawn, semi-spawn, spawn. South end is spawn, middle of the lake is, you got spawners and post-spawners, north end is all post-spawn. Because the north end of the lake for about 8 miles is 10 feet deep at the deepest part, full of weeds. And then you get down towards Union Springs, which is mid-lake, you're 200-300 feet of water in the middle of the lake. Yeah, you have your shallow coves off to the side, but that shallow water mid-lake is about 10 degrees colder than the north end shallow water. You go to the south end of the lake, now let's say mid-lake is 65, south end is 55. So if you're looking to chase spawning fish all the way through June on a big lake like that, you just keep running south, and you're going to find them. Canisius Lake, for example, I was fishing a tournament out there last year, opening weekend at bass. Smallmouth were still on nests. I think we didn't win, but we had like 17 and change, and we probably caught, I think, 30 or 40 fish in every one of them we saw. Sight fishing with the spider grub. This color right here. Real small jig head, real small bait. Small bait do catch a lot of big fish. So, you guys fishing in the high school bass tournaments, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. What's your first one this year?
We have Cayuga, May 11th.
Respawn north end.
Well, yeah, they definitely should be pre-spawn at that point in time. It all depends on the way the weather acts. There's last few springs, it's gone from 30 to 80 in about a week and a half time frame. So that really messes with the fish and gets them all jazzed up. It pushes them shallow, and then it gets cold, and they pull back a little bit and push them shallow again. So you guys have to get out there and do some pre-fishing and really explore it a little bit. But there's a lot of good places out there, especially the community holes, the rock piles that run across the north end of the lake out there. There's always fish on those, any time of the year really. So there's a lot of stuff there that you can play with. And if you really want to get frisky, you can get up in the cattails and poke around in there for some real big ones that are living in there. But I didn't tell you that. So that's pretty much it. Any other questions? Did I answer what you guys were looking for today? Did I give you too much information?
A little bit on line selection for some of your stuff, if
Yes.
you don't mind. I mean, it's
Line
great that
selection.
you got,
That was a topic that I should have talked about.
No, you're good.
I didn't even think about it.
For these guys, especially for some that, we got all levels in here today.
Yeah.
So,
the finesse style stuff, this is a medium heavy spinning rod. This is what they would call an ultralight, but it's not an ultralight. Okay. I fish a variety of different rods, different reels. I'm looking at myself here. This is 8-pound vicious fluorocarbon. This is 6-pound vicious fluorocarbon on this one. Again, I pair these with different size heads. Now, if I'm fishing shallow water in the springtime, light cover, 6-8 pound test, it doesn't make a difference. Just throw it out there, you're catching fish, you're having a good time. If I'm fishing deeper water, things of that nature, but I still want to use the lighter baits, I will go to the 6-pound test, fluorocarbon. Fluorocarbon, if you guys don't know, sinks, and monofilament semi-floats, and braid floats. That's your three different distinctions between them. Monofilament has a lot of stretch, like a rubber band, kind of a shock absorbing aspect to it. Fluorocarbon has limited stretch, and braid has zero stretch. That's why I said braid will straighten out your hooks. Very important. Keep that in mind. You don't want to do that. That's why I use either fluorocarbon or mono on my spinning reels for the finesse stuff. The mono is a cheap selection. Mono is a good selection. Just make sure it's not that real bright blue high vis stuff. You want clear or moss green when it comes to monofilament. And with fluorocarbon. You can get fluorocarbon that's like the high vis blue, and it just stuff just kind of glows in the dark like a black light, you know, when the sun's out. Defeats the purpose to me. And it doesn't disappear in the water column, that high vis blue stuff.
Would you fish monofilament on something versus floral on something? Like, would you fish more like mono on your reaction jerkbait kind of stuff where you're not worried about that stretch and that stretch helps you, versus that finesse stuff where you really want to feel more, where you fish floral? Or is there
when it comes to crankbaits in general, I fish fluoro and mono, and occasionally I'll fish braid when I'm ripping a rattle trap or a nipless through the weeds. But when I'm fishing, so as you guys get more advanced into this sport, you're going to have a lot of fishing balls. It's the one thing when you guys get married or have girlfriends, they have a lot of shoes. You just compare your rods to their shoes. They have a shoe for every outfit. I have a pole for every situation. That's what I tell my wife. So this is a crankbait rod. This is a composite Powell, real soft tip on it. So when you're fishing anything with treble hooks, they tend to rip out of the fish's face real easily. All right, so you're going to want to use fluorocarbon, you're going to want to use mono, and you're going to want to use a soft rod. So it doesn't have to be a high-end crankbait rod like this by any means. You can buy a cheap, soft, whippy rod at Walmart that you use for bait casting or you use for spinning rod. Even an ugly stick is actually a pretty good crankbait rod because it's a real soft tip to it. It absorbs the shock when something hits it. You want something, when they hit the crankbait, you don't want to yank it out of their face and rip all the hooks out of their face. You want them to mouth it. You want to put tension on it so that when they're turning their head and shaking it, those hooks are trying to penetrate into something, and you're giving a little bit extra force to make that happen. That's really all it is. You don't want to go crazy and set that hook like you're fishing a jig in the weeds, because you're just going to rip it out of their face every time. So you need to give those hooks time to penetrate, so you need that extra stretch. You need that either that real soft line or a soft rod and a soft line combo. Make sense? Questions on that? So don't throw away your junky rods so you can afford to buy better and newer stuff. Keep your junks. I'm serious. And for the crankbaits, this is 17-pound Vicious mono. That's what I have on here. That's kind of my go-to thing, especially in the springtime. I like the heavy line because when I run crankbaits along docks, running crankbaits along trees, things like that, I have the power to yank them out of there if I do get bit. At the same time, I have the power to yank the crankbait out of the tree if I get snagged, give it a little extra oomph to try and get it back. Especially around here, weed mats, you tend to catch those quite a bit. It's a whole different topic to me. I consider that dumping in the lake because people just leave them out there all year and they're not really supposed to. But anyways, I digress on that subject. I've lost a few crankbaits to it, if you can't imagine. So I like the mono. And the other thing the mono gives you the opportunity to do is you can take, like this is a Spro. That's probably going to dive 8 to 10 feet deep on 10-pound test. On 17-pound mono, it's going to dive 6 to 8 feet deep. So just about every crankbait on the face of the earth was designed to dive the maximum depth range in 10 to 12-pound test mono fluorocarbon. It's the size and diameter of the line that affects the depth of your crankbaits and the type of your line. So if I want this bait to run deeper, but I still want to use heavy line, I'll put 17 fluoro on here, and that heavy fluorocarbon will drive that bait down a little bit deeper as that line gets in the water column and sinks itself. It's like lead core line with fly fishing. You're throwing a fly, drifting streamers, you want that lead core line to drag your leader down. Kind of the same concept with fluorocarbon. Helps put 17 on here, you're running a square bill that runs 5 feet on mono, you might get 6 feet with fluorocarbon. Just drags it down a little bit deeper, that's all.
What ratio is that real?
Low gear ratio. So I have a 4:3 to 1 that a friend of mine made me. It's an old reel, but it's like a boat winch. I use that for DD22s and the 10XDs. Those are real big giant crankbaits that dive like 25 feet deep, and it's like pulling a hubcap sideways through the water. Lots of resistance. When you get into the big heavy duty crankbaits like that, you're going to feel a lot of force on your arms and your hands from just trying to hold the rod in place when you're cranking that big bait through the water. The low gear ratio reels relieves some of the stress on your body, but also keeps you from overfishing the bait. So my recommendation, if you want to buy a bait casting reel for crankbaits in general, whether it be jerk baits, square bills, deep diving crankbaits, I would go like a 5:3, 5:8 to 1. It's kind of a good ballpark. Low gear ratio reel still has some pickup speed to it where you can catch up to a fish. That, like the 4:3 to 1 that I have, it's so slow. If you're not right on them in the beginning, you're not going to really catch up. You're cranking 100 miles an hour just to keep pressure on the fish so they don't spit the hook. But that is a very specific technique that I don't use all the time. The 5:3, 5:8 gear ratios, 5:6 to 1 gear ratios, that's perfect for any crankbait fishing that you really want to do. When I'm fishing shallow water, a lot of times I'll use a 6:3 to 1. You just got to remember what speed you're using and just reel that handle a little slower. That's all it is. But once you get accustomed to fishing crankbaits, you're going to get used to the way they wiggle, especially certain brands, certain sizes, certain models. Now that feels just about right there. You see it come through the water. It's doing this perfect. It's not doing this and rolling off to the side. When it's rolling off to the side and wiggling as hard as the damn thing can without shaking hooks off, you're overfishing it basically. You're gonna get comfortable with it. You're gonna understand what that bait should be doing, and you're gonna be on top of the speed every time without even thinking about it. So, perplexed? Okay. Any questions? Concerns? Answer enough for you?
Yeah.